Thank you, Mike. Okay, got it. We're now on YouTube, and this is our April speaker series of the Green Valley Recreation Camera Club. Our speaker today is Emily Burns, and Emily comes to us from UC Berkeley, but now she is the head of a very interesting project that involves photography in Tucson called the Island FotoFauna project. And it's one that all of you who'd like will be able to take part in. It's real science, a real recording of animal populations and movements, and it's really exciting to hear how we can be part of that. Before we get going on that though, Emily, I'd like to hear from you a little bit about how you got involved in this project and what it entails.
Sure. Well, thanks, Holly. And it's nice to be here with all of you today. I have been working with Sky Island Alliance for almost 3 years. Before that, I was working in conservation science in California in the Redwood Forest. Since coming down to the Sky Island region, which is a diamond-shaped region of 55 mountain ranges in the US and in Mexico, I really started to fall in love with the diversity of wildlife in this place, because we have these amazing variation in habitat from the deserts through the grasslands and up into the different layers of forests as you go up in elevation in each Sky Island. It supports so many different species, and technology just keeps getting better and better and more affordable for us groups like ours that are a nonprofit to use them cameras for research, and for individuals like all of you to be able to put them around your home and join in a community science project, Island FotoFauna. And so when you're ready, I'll start sharing slides and I'll walk through what the project is and how to get going with it.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Go ahead with the screen share and everybody will be able to see that. You'll see it better, by the way, if you click your view on speaker. Okay, here we go.
Okay, fabulous. Well, the project Island FotoFauna was launched in October 2020, and it was really during the pandemic when so much of life retreated into our home environments. I know for me and my colleagues, we really found a lot of joy and entertainment and fascination in what was happening just outside of our home windows. I personally put out a set of cameras around my house in Tucson and suddenly realized there were so many species coming through my yard, moving through my neighborhood that I didn't routinely see, including American badger. I didn't know we had American badger. And it was really that love and fascination of wildlife cameras that made us sit and think, how could we harness this interest that so many of us share in using trail cameras at our homes to actually do something meaningful for conservation in the region. And that's where this project really came from. Our goal in conservation is to be able to develop strategies and do projects that are going to protect the diversity of life in a place. But it's really difficult to do conservation if we don't fundamentally know which species are occurring in the landscape and where they need to go and have safe passage to get from one protected land to the next. And so fundamentally, FotoFauna is built on this principle. You can't protect the wildlife species when we don't know where they are. And I know for many members of the public, it must seem like, oh, park managers, land managers, biologists, we know where the corridors are, these pathways that animals are using to move between protected space. We must know who lives in urban environments. But fundamentally, we don't. And we often, it's difficult to track, and it's changing all of the time as many different forces are influencing how species are doing, where they need to move to adjust to human development, climate change, and so many environmental factors that keep moving. And so this is where having a community science approach with many people contributing data, it can give us a much better picture about the status of wildlife species all around us. So FotoFauna is a network, a monitoring network of wildlife cameras. And just in the first 18 months, you can see where we have camera locations reporting in from both the US side here in Arizona, we've got one in California, and then down in Mexico as well, which is really exciting. Our region is truly binational. It crosses over the US-Mexico border, and we share many of the same species in these different places. So we love having a project that actually is getting information on migratory species as they're moving up from Sonora into Arizona. We'll be able to see them on different photofauna cameras over the year. Just to give you some background on who's involved in this project, we have a whole variety of different organizations that have joined as project partners. Many parks, other nonprofits, Tohono Chulg, so gardens, have cameras out for their own purposes. Maybe they're using them in communications, or they have a specific research question that they're trying to answer. But sort of like going fishing with a big net, you might be looking for one question, but you collect so many more photographs about animals that if we collect them together and use that bycatch, if you will, into this project, we all can benefit from understanding which species are being seen across the landscape and where they are. So these partners have really helped get the word out, invite more volunteers to join the network. And so we're so grateful to all of them. The data that we collect through our checklist program through FotoFauna is updated in an interactive map, and I will be showing that to you in this presentation, and Quiet Creek Remote Sensing helps us with that. And the project was launched with funding support from Saguaro National Park and the National Park Service, their Southwest Border Resources Protection Program. So the federal government sees the value in us doing this type of community science work, and they were really instrumental in getting it off the ground. And today we have sustaining support from the Wilberforce Foundation and individual Sky Island Alliance donors that keep our project staff able to work helping all of you get your cameras up and running, checking to make sure species are being identified correctly. And also we're setting up lending libraries in communities that don't have access to wildlife cameras. So we're really excited. We have 2 in Arizona so far and 2 down in Sonora. And I can talk a little bit more about that in a bit. So let's start with the very fundamentals. I have a sense that some of you already have been using wildlife cameras and are very familiar with how they work. You might even have a favorite place where you like to have your camera, and that's great. This project has no requirement for the type of wildlife camera that you use. Basically, all that we ask is that you find a camera that works for you, that you can maintain, and you keep that camera running for at least a whole month, because the data that we collect is based on a whole month of observation. So I don't get any kickbacks from the sales of cameras. All I can do is talk to you about ones that I personally use around my house and my experience with them. There are so many great cameras available to you today. So you really just need to find one that fits your budget and your interest and ability to maintain that camera. Traditional cameras like the 2 on the left, the Midas and the Brownings, are your average wildlife camera that is a passive infrared, uses passive infrared detection and is triggered when it senses motion and or heat. These cameras are easy when you're working someplace further away from your house. They run off battery power. They use a memory card, an SD card, to record the photos or videos. And depending on how active things are in front of your camera, you would just need to go and check that camera, swap out that memory card by hand, and take your data back to your home computer and just maintain them periodically. I check my own home cameras of these 2 models about every week. They can go longer than that, especially in the winter when things are a little bit slower. But I have some on a water bowl that gets so busy in the summer, I have to check it every couple of days. Otherwise, it just fills up. My memory cards fill up. So that is a little bit more manual. I've been really surprised at the reasonably good quality that comes from the Midas cameras, given it's less than $70, or at least it was last time I checked on Amazon. The Browning Strike Force is the research camera that we use. We've got more than 100 of these cameras in a formal research study along the US-Mexico border, south of Patagonia. They work incredibly well. Both of these cameras have the advantage of when you open it up, you have a nice view screen. So you actually, it's very small, but you can see a thumbnail image of what's being detected on your camera, and it helps troubleshooting in the field. You don't have to keep running back to your camera, to your computer to check and see if the images, the angle is what you want. So those are the two ones, and I'll just contrast it with the Google Nest camera, which is a home security camera. There are many different types of home security cameras that you could use. The difference with cameras like this is that they are often plugged in, so you don't have to worry about batteries. You can plug it into a socket, but it would need to be someplace where you have a power source. And then you can get a live feed of the videos as it's being recorded over Wi-Fi. So the advantages of that, and I do have one of these, and the reason why I love it is because the first thing that I do when I wake up in the morning is I look and see what alerts I have for my camera. And I'm always checking to see, did I get a badger? Did the bobcat come by? What's been going on in the night? So that can be really fun to do. They typically, like this one, the Google Nest, you have to buy online storage for it to hold up to, I think, maybe 3 months worth of data. And then I can download video clips from it. So there's a little extra cost associated with having that kind of cloud storage for the videos. It's also wider angle, so it doesn't have the same sort of perspective. And sometimes I don't have as much resolution on the videos from the Google Nest camera as I would from a traditional trail camera. So those are just the kind of trade-offs that you might want to think about if you are contemplating buying your very first camera. So like I said a few minutes ago, the key is to place your camera in a good location. And I'm going to show you how I place my cameras around my own home. You get it set up. It might take you a couple days to keep checking it and tweaking it, getting the angle just right so that it works really well for you. And then you let it go for an entire month. We base FotoFauna on entire calendar months. So we would ask you to report if you get a camera set up at any point in the next couple of weeks, a May checklist. So have your camera running in the same location May 1st through the end of that month. And then in June, you can process your photographs and submit a checklist. You can really mount your camera to anything handy. And if you're mounting it around your house, you're going to have so many more options than we do when we go out to the field and are doing this in open space. We often take advantages of trees, interesting structures like this, so tall flower stalk on the right side. You can use fence posts. I even around my house have cat scratchers, posts that have a nice flat bottom, and I can strap the camera to it. So there's a lot of different ways you can do it. You can even drive a T-post into the ground and then strap the camera to that. Depending on where your camera is, it may be more visible to the public. So you might want to think about whether your camera is in a place where it might get stolen. Many cameras do come with a case that can be locked with some sort of a bike lock. So if you think theft is an issue for you, that's something to think about. And the only advice I would give you about how to mount it directly in that location is you don't typically want to have your camera pointing due west or due east. When the sun is coming up and when it's setting, that light is so low in the horizon, it'll go right into the camera lens, and that will really blow out the image. So my recommendation is to angle it any other cardinal direction, but just avoid the sunset and sunrise direct angles. That's usually best. I tend to mount my cameras pretty low, and I'm going to show you examples around my house of exactly what that looks like. But anywhere where you're facing something of interest where you think animals are going to be going. So I have a lot of fun pointing my camera towards some sort of a burrow or hole in the ground that I find that pops up in the desert around my house. This is a place of activity for the animal that created the burrow. Animals that may move in and share the burrow, so that multiple squirrel species and sometimes snakes will live together actually in these elaborate underground burrows. And you can see predators coming through as they're checking to see if there's something tasty, a meal that's going to pop out of the hole in the ground. So something like a burrow can be really interesting. My burrow camera actually also documents all the same species I get at my water source. They're just not there as frequently. So the coyotes still run by, the bobcats run by. So sometimes it's fun to just put your camera on an interesting feature like a burrow. You also could do something like watching a feeder. You won't get all the same species, of course. If it's a hummingbird feeder off the ground, you're not going to get the large terrestrial animals like the coyotes, for example. You will probably, though, get raccoons, and I definitely get raccoons on my my feeder cams. But it's really fun to see the migratory birds as they come up, and which ones they will come and actually drink the nectar. And then at my house, we have the lesser long-nosed bats that arrive at some point in the summer and stay all fall. They stayed coming about an hour after dusk every night, draining my hummingbird feeders, making me buy a lot of sugar last year, all the way into December. So almost to the end of 2021, I was really surprised to see how late in the year they were coming. You can also watch the activity in a wash. And there was some discussion before we started today about how often animals do move through areas like washes. Animals, especially the larger terrestrial mammals like bobcats or deer, javelina, coyotes, of course, they like an easy walk just like we do. And so these natural stream beds are frequently used by animals, and it's a great place to see a lot of animals traveling through. I have a camera mounted on this wooden block here in this wash right below my house. And I've been watching the parade of animals that go through over the course of the year. I almost lost this camera during the monsoon. This was the first time since I've lived in this house that the wash actually flooded. So you do want to be mindful if you're working in a wash to think about the elevation that you mount the camera. If it's right down in the bottom, and we do get some big monsoon rains, you might find your camera flooded at some point. So just something to be cognizant of. I know there were many FotoFauna cameras that were lost in the monsoon last year. And then, of course, watching water. So I have a block of wood with a Google Nest camera attached to it right outside of my house window. And this points directly at a small water bowl. It's 18 inches across. And I am just totally flabbergasted by the animals that come right past our window all times of year, all times of day. And so it can be really fun to have something like a water source. It could be a bird feeder, maybe you have a pond, and just put the camera somewhere nearby. The closer you are, the more likely you'll see the detail in the animals because you just have a closer perspective. And in the lower right-hand corner here, you can see a badger. We had a badger that came in 2020. This was one of the gifts of the pandemic. I was home to watch her. It was a mother badger that had 2 offspring, and she would come in the heat of the summer in June and lie on her back and just relax. She just needed a minute to herself after raising her babies, and it was so much fun to watch her in the bowl. So I don't know if you'll have badger in your neighborhood, but you think you'll be surprised at what is actually coming right through your yard. Okay, so you find, but get your camera, you find a location. Don't be surprised if it takes you a little bit of trial and error to find the best place. You might not get anything in the first 24 hours. Be patient, and if there's really not a lot of activity, you can go ahead and, of course, move it. But once you find your good location, just leave it there and let the camera record what happens. And reviewing the camera photos is just one of the best things. Every time I have my camera cards, I keep them in this little case. I collect them from around my house. It's like Christmas for me, going in to see, oh my gosh, what did I get? Did I get anything new on the camera roll this time? So I'm going to show you some of the photographs that we get off of our trail cameras. All of these photos are from the Browning Strikeforce Pro cameras that I showed you on that earlier slide. These are the camera array that we have set at the border in the Patagonia Mountains, San Rafael Valley, and Huachuca Mountains. So mountain lion, coyotes, and the weather that's captured on these cameras is pretty phenomenal too. Deer. Anyone know what that is? It's a roadrunner. It's not the most common perspective that we get of roadrunners when they're dashing in front of us, but this one was actually flying up to perch on the camera. American kestrel. Red-tailed hawk coming in also to perch on the camera. You can see a little lizard here. So you will actually likely get reptiles on your camera. Often it's said that they won't be detected because these cameras are responding to motion and heat. And because reptiles are ectotherms, they're the same temperature as their environment, they don't have that heat factor, but they are pretty quick. So a lot of these cameras will get triggered by an animal that's dashing through. We have snakes, Gila monsters, we have tortoises and lizards that get detected on our cameras. And then insects. We get a lot of butterflies. Honeybees actually trigger my cameras. So you will see insects that may not be of interest to you. And I will say you have to be super patient when especially if you're working in an environment where there's a lot of vegetation moving or a lot of diversity. You're going to have to sift through a lot of photographs before you find the species you're most interested in. So mostly I look at videos and photographs of mourning doves. I don't want people to think it's all badgers bathing, but it makes it all the more worth it when you do find the photographs that bring so much joy, that are unusual. Okay, so I like to say that what FotoFauna is really doing, it's almost like playing bingo, and you're looking to see which animals pop up for you over the course of each month. So we ask you to do a separate FotoFauna checklist for every camera you have for every month. So I have 5 different camera points, so I could do 5 different April checklists if I wanted to from my property. And we would ask you to only report photographs from a single camera, so not to mix together photographs from 2 separate cameras into the same checklist. So what you do is you go through all of your photos, and all you need to do is find one photograph for each species that you've detected to share with your checklist. So whether you have 55 sightings of mule deer or just 1 during a month, it's the same. Yes, you've detected it, and you just need to submit one of those photographs. And it doesn't matter when in the month or how many times it showed up. So you could imagine in a given month here at one of our border cameras, these are the species that showed up, let's say, in April this year. Well, if you do this project in sequential months, over time, you're going to get a much richer picture of all the species that show up in your location. So for example, if you let your camera run for 5 months, you might have detected 8 species in total, cumulatively, over those 5 months. But if you were to let it run for more months, let's say you let it go just two more months, you might actually add 3 additional species. And scientists refer to this as a species accumulation curve. So when you first start using your wildlife camera, you're going to rapidly see new species right away. And then over time, mostly you're going to continue to see the same species without new ones. And then very slowly, it'll continue to go up. For many of our cameras, we say it needs to run actually for 24 months before you've seen most of the common species, which is kind of interesting. It's a little bit different in the urban environment, but it's certainly true in wild open space. So I want to just describe this a little bit more and why it's worth keeping your camera running for multiple months through the project. So all 4 skunk species were detected from the region. We have 4 regional skunk species here in the Sky Islands. We have hooded skunk, spotted skunk, hognose skunk, and striped skunk. Now they all have slightly different home ranges in terms of where we find these species, but there is a camera at the border where we finally saw all of them in the same month in June of last year. And that's really, really interesting. We'd actually been running this camera for, I think it was about 5 years before we got all of these skunks in the same habitat at the same time. So don't be surprised if you see some species 1 month and you don't see them again, and then you see them later. These animals are moving all around the landscape all the time. And that's why there's so much strength in having these cameras all together in the network. So I'm going to walk through and just show you the types of species that we ask for in the checklist, things that you can detect here in the region on your cameras. And there's a whole mammal identification guide and another webinar you can watch on our website. And we'll share these links with you after today's program, where you can learn how to identify some of the more difficult to differentiate species. So we have 3 canines on our list: the coyote, the gray fox, and the kit fox. And coyotes, I listed them first. The canines, they're the most commonly observed species that we get. We have a lot of coyotes in the FotoFauna project, and I'll show you a graph of how that shakes out. We ask about the hooved mammals, so javelina, white-tailed deer, mule deer. Pronghorn, we do have pronghorn down in the San Rafael Valley and other places in southern Arizona. Bighorn sheep, we haven't yet detected on the project, mostly because we don't yet have cameras in the higher elevation areas where bighorn sheep are found, or likewise with elk, they're more northerly at latitudes. The cats, there are 4 cat species in the region: bobcat, mountain lion, ocelot, and jaguar. And while no checklists have submitted any jaguar observations yet, we do have ocelot in the project that have been reported by our partners in Sonora. Rabbits and hares. Well, you're very likely to find cottontails on your cameras. I certainly have a lot of the desert cottontail around my house. For the purposes of this project, we combine both the desert and eastern cottontails together into one category. And that's because it's not possible to distinguish those 2 species from wildlife camera photographs alone. But these species have different elevational habitats. So when we analyze the data, we're able to tell which one we can assign it to a tentative species later in our analysis. So any cottontail that you see, you can upload your photo to that part of the checklist. Then we have black-tailed jackrabbit and antelope jackrabbit. If you do have jackrabbits around your house, you might wonder, well, how do you tell those apart? And we've got a lot of information about that on our website. But the shorthand is the antelope jackrabbit has silvery white sides. And so if you can get a reasonable image of the side of the jackrabbit, it's very distinctive, the color difference. We don't have a comprehensive list of birds in the checklist, but birds are very often showing up on our cameras. So we do have certain ones that we're really interested in, especially ones that are migratory and are commonly picked up on cameras, or are resident and are able to live well in the urban environment. We're really fascinated to know which neighborhoods and what degree of urbanization is able to still support many of these wildlife species. So we look for occurrences of Gambel's quail, of course, the roadrunner, Cooper's hawks, turkey vultures. Turkey vultures are migratory in our region. Just started seeing them around my neighborhood in March. Gould's turkey, gray hawk. And then we have space for you to submit other observations you have of birds. So these birds that I'm showing you are not on our checklist, but there's a space for you to add up to 10 more bird species if you'd like to share. And we always love seeing the beautiful bird photos that people get on their cameras. The raccoon family, there are 3 species in particular that we're looking for: the raccoon, ringtail. We actually have ringtail in Midtown Tucson. Nobody really knew that until we started the FotoFauna project, and then there were the ringtail coming to eat the dates out of people's palm trees in their backyards. And then the white-nosed coati. Rodents. Rodents are fun to learn how to identify. The rock squirrel, Harris's antelope squirrel, and round-tailed squirrel. These are 3 that I find around my house. But there are other squirrels at higher elevation in the Sky Island region, from the Arizona gray squirrel, Abbott squirrel, and cliff chipmunk. And then the really big rodents that we love, the North American porcupine. We have this right down at the border at the headwaters of the Santa Cruz when we first started getting images of this animal on our wildlife cameras, we didn't know what it was. We weren't able to see the head. And we had some staff pools about what was this creature because it didn't look like anything else. We were really, really surprised when we finally got a good picture of its head. These animals used to be much more common in the region, but their numbers have been going down. And we're excited to still see that there's a healthy population of them in the San Rafael Valley. And beavers are beginning to make a comeback in some of the rivers around the border, including the San Pedro River. Skunks, I already mentioned a little bit about them. We've got these 4 different species. These are probably what people misidentify the most on their FotoFauna checklists. So every time you submit a checklist, you're always welcome to reach out to us in advance and say, I'm not sure, is this a hooded skunk or a striped skunk? And our wildlife specialist can help you. But we will also review everything you submit. And if we see you making an error over and over again, we will let you know and help you understand the differences between some of these skunk species, because they can be a little bit tricky. And then other species, which I'm not going to present in their families, because we just are focusing on one representative from each taxonomic family. But black bear, we get great photos of black bears on our local cameras around in different parts of the range. Badger, like I've mentioned, long-tailed weasel. Bat species, if you do get any photos of bats, you're welcome to submit them to the project. We're always looking out for the North Mexican Virginia opossum. This is a special subspecies that just extends up over the US-Mexico border into Arizona. It's really distinctive with this dark base to its tail and then the lighter tip. So this one is found up through the San Pedro watershed, but it really doesn't go that far into Arizona. And this is one of those species I think we'll learn a lot more about through FotoFauna, exactly how far north does this species occur. And then Gila monsters. We always have to ask, have you seen any Gila monsters? This particular one is a photograph from my burrow camera. So put it out there to look for badgers, but one day a Gila monster crawled out of it and I got it on camera, which is fun. Okay, so you look for all of these species, and like I said, you're kind of like you're playing bingo. How many species did you get total for each month? And just going back to the skunk example, I think I mentioned it had been many, many months before we finally got them all together in the same month. So this camera with first we started seeing hognose and hooded skunks, 10 months, so about a year, just those 2 species. Finally got a spotted skunk and striped skunk almost around that 2-year mark. But then it was 43 months before we finally got them all in the same month to occur. So it's just kind of fascinating, the combination of animals that might show up and how long it might take to get the bingo that you want. So we can look a little bit together at the results of the project. We have just over a year's worth of data collected now and available in a viewer. And that's one of the links that will be shared out over the program, after the program. And you can explore the map yourself and look at which species are showing up in which neighborhoods. But generally, this is the data that we found. We have 1,400 monthly checklists that have been submitted to the project so far. And out of 1,400, 750 of those checklists did have coyote. So my money is, depending on, as long as your camera isn't behind a fence that coyotes can't jump, you're very likely to get coyotes on your camera. After that, javelina, cottontails, bobcats, white-tailed deer, and the Gambel's quail have been the most commonly observed species. And there are more than 40 different taxa that have been detected so far across the network. If we look a little bit more closely to your area around Green Valley, I just zoomed into the map and took a screenshot of where we have cameras. There are cameras at the Canoa Ranch, which is Pima County land, I believe, that have been reporting checklists into the project over time. The difference between the blue and the yellow dots is whether there's drinkable water available for wildlife within 50 feet of the camera. So that's one of the questions that we do ask in the checklist. So a lot of opportunity to learn more about the animals around Green Valley, and it'll be really exciting with your support and if you spread the word about the project to see if we can get much better extension of the monitoring network going on in your neighborhood. So here are the species that have been detected so far in Green Valley. There are 15 species on the checklist. Coyote was, again, the most common one, followed by mule deer, javelina, cottontails, raccoon, and then bobcat. So gives you a sense of probably your most likely species to see if the data that has been submitted slightly further south of Green Valley is reflective of what's in your neighborhood. This link will get emailed out to you, but basically there's a very simple form that you go to submit a checklist. It walks you through exactly what to do when you submit your first checklist, and it'll remember your information from last time. So we do ask for your contact information. This is kept confidential. We don't post it or distribute it to anyone, but we need this in order to get back to you and let you know, oh, nope, you had a striped skunk, not a hognose skunk, or something like that. So we do at least want a name and email address. And then because this project is happening on both sides of the border, everything is in English and Spanish, but we want to make sure that we write back to you in your preferred language. So by letting us know if you prefer English or Spanish, either our US or Mexican wildlife specialist will contact you if there's any questions. We ask you to tell us your exact camera location. This is also kept confidential. So here's an example of someone went out and you actually from your phone would be able to get your latitude and longitude for your camera location. And I'm happy to go into more detail at the end of the talk if anyone wants to know how to do that. If you take a photograph of your camera, you can pull that out of the metadata and copy and paste that latitude and longitude into the map widget in the form. And I just want to share a little bit about how we handle that locational data. So sometimes people do that over and over again. They don't have exact accuracy of exactly where their camera is based on the errors of our phone GPSs. So when we analyze all the data, if we have a camera location within 10 meters that's popping up in multiple checklists, we will pull those together and have that as just a single point in our analysis. Here's an example of where I live in my home cameras. So these red points are my actual camera locations, but we want to protect the privacy of both my house, my cameras, and the animals that live here. So what we do is when we put our data up into that public map viewer, all of the locations are randomized to within 1 kilometer of the true location. So that means when you go into the map viewer, you might say, oh my gosh, someone put a camera on my house. Well, no, it might be your neighbor a kilometer away, but it just got randomly assigned to your location. So that's done really just for privacy. So we don't ever share the actual location of the data that you send us. And then, like I said, we do ask you if there's drinkable water available to animals in the proximity of the camera. So there are some places where, like my wash camera at the top, I never have drinkable water down there. Okay, maybe for an hour during the monsoon season when it was rushing, there was, but generally for the month that I report over and over again, there's no drinkable water. In other cases, you might have your camera on a water source that seasonally dries up. And we do want to have an understanding when we're interpreting where we're finding species across the environment. Are they more likely to be tracking water? Are they coming in closer to places where there's drinkable water? So for example, there's a spring at Coronado National Memorial that most months of the year, it does have water present, and those checklists would say, yes, there's water. But then of course, there might be a couple dry months when there isn't water present. And we'll be looking to see, do we not get mountain lion coming by in those months when the spring goes dry? And then of course you might have intentionally put your camera facing a water source that is full all of the time, in which case you can just always answer yes. Okay, I'm wrapping up now and I'm really excited to take your questions. I'm sure you've got a lot of things you'd like to know. I just wanted to share that you are able to support this project just in so many different ways. You could just let other people know, friends that may have wildlife cameras, know about the project, share the links with them, see if they want to contribute data. If you don't want to maintain your own camera, but are interested in looking at photographs, we have more cameras and more photographs than our staff can often easily manage. And so we'd be happy to accept volunteers that wanted to help us with photo processing. If you have the means to support the project financially, that's super helpful for us. You can buy FotoFauna gear. All the proceeds from the FotoFauna gear in our bonfire store go to help us put cameras in students' hands in Sonora, Mexico. We're trying to inspire a next generation of wildlife biologists that care about conservation to work in the region. And so our Lending Library program is funded from the sale of these items. And you can also, of course, make a direct donation if you're so moved. But more than anything, I just hope that you enjoy wildlife watching. There's so many different programs and projects, as I'm sure you know, where you can share your observations of what you're seeing. And we hope that if you do have a wildlife camera, that you'll consider the FotoFauna project. It's a really fun, satisfying thing to do when you go through all of your photos and send that checklist off. And we'll receive that and help get the word out about where these species are being found over time. Okay, well, great. And you're welcome to contact me after this presentation if you need more information or have questions. This is my email address. And you can follow my social media with my crazy wildlife videos on Instagram at Tucson Emily. Right, so I'll stop there.
Emily, you really, thanks. That was fabulous. Emily at Sky Islands, there are probably a few people in our audience who don't know what Sky Islands are.
Sure.
So could you clarify that for people? It kind of seems confusing about islands in the desert, I know.
Well, the term was coined because we have these amazing forested mountaintops that punctuate our region, that are in between the Sierra Madre in Mexico, the mountain range that comes up, bringing a lot of tropical species up northward, and the Colorado Plateau to the north of us. And so what these Sky Islands are they elevated forest habitats that are separated from one another with grasslands and desert. So you can have species that only live in the forests on the top of our mountains that may never travel to other Sky Islands, or you have species like black bear, mountain lion, jaguar, that are these wide-ranging species that need multiple Sky Islands to meet their requirements for food, water, mates, and shelter. So that's what makes this region so rich, because they're moving between this variety of habitats.
Great. Okay. Thank you. It's really a great opportunity for people in the Camera Club who obviously are interested in photography to not only hear about such a project, but to get involved themselves. So we'll be putting those links out in the newsletter, and I think email to the people who tuned into this. Phil said he could do that as well. And they can take a look at things online, like your badger sighting. I didn't know there were badger in Arizona, so I was really surprised at that. That's very cool.
Yeah.
And there might be some other people in the audience who want to click their reactions to your program. It's down at the bottom if you want to show your reaction, or if you have a question, you can either chat it or turn on your audio and your video if you choose, and talk to Emily. Just kind of do it slow so we don't all talk at once. There's 4 chats that I'm going to start with, just letting you read them. I guess you could anyway, but the link from Emily to everyone is there in the chat if you want to look at that now. And we hear extremely interesting presentation. Thank you. Great and interesting. Great presentation. Thank you, Emily. Really informative, eager to set up a camera. Very well organized presentation. Excellent images. Thank you. How about questions? Any questions from the audience?
Like Bonnie has a question.
Yeah. Am I unmuted? I think
Yes.
I'm unmuted.
Yeah.
Hi, Emily. That was really great. I have a question. We are in a fairly, urban homeowners association here in Green Valley. And as I look out at my backyard, we're at a corner. So I've got traffic, although after 7, there's not a lot. What do you recommend in terms of an urban area? Am I going to get cars?
It depends how you angle your camera. So first of all, we're very interested and really want urban data, because so often the studies are happening in parks and they're happening in places that are habitat cores for species. But we really want to know, well, how is the speed limit working for species in your neighborhood, right? Which species are successfully living in your area. So please do put cameras in urban spaces. Often people will just try to angle it so it's not getting triggered by people walking on the sidewalk or by road traffic. So there can be a little bit of a trick to figure out what the right angle is that's going to work best for you. but most likely animals are walking all around this area. And especially once the human activity goes down, there's a lot that's happening nocturnal. So usually people just try to face it maybe away from the street, away from a sidewalk, things like that. But even one of my cameras includes our driveway. I get occasional, I see our car going out as we go to pick up our kid from school. But generally I'm avoiding my road traffic whenever I can.
Okay, Michael Grosch. Oh, you've got to unmute yourself.
How's that?
Better.
Okay. I have a trail camera and I use it quite a bit, but unfortunately, it's been so windy lately that I have hundreds and hundreds of pictures of moving vegetation and nothing else.
I feel your pain.
Any particular tips? I don't think there's a sensitivity thing on my camera.
Yeah, well, so the closer you have your camera facing vegetation, I learned the hard way I couldn't have one location because a creosote bush was just moving all the time and filling up the memory card. So you can move further away from vegetation or try to find a location where it will have less triggered. There are some great places that are worth it to deal with some moving vegetation. But yeah, I had to go turn off one of my cameras this week because it was only lasting for an afternoon and it was full because there was so much wind coming through. We work in the grasslands and the border. And just so you understand the pain and suffering that we're going through, we have across our 63 cameras in the first years of the project, we had 4 million photographs that we went through that we had to analyze, and we did.
Is that why you need volunteers?
Yeah, well, actually, we haven't asked any of our volunteers to do that. We have a wildlife specialist that's amazing, but out of 4 billion photographs, we only had 71,000 detections of animals. So it is a lot of work sometimes to get through it, and I know that's not super fun. So the tricks are staying away from vegetation. You can change the capture delay on these cameras. So that's one thing I would do to minimize your camera if you do have a lot of shifting vegetation. You can choose whether the camera takes the next video or the next photograph immediately or wait a whole minute before it triggers again. So those are things you can play around with to just limit how many photographs get taken. But it's the downside to doing this kind of monitoring with cameras that get triggered by motion, for sure.
Thanks.
Okay, do you coordinate your data with iNaturalist.org? Question from
Great.
John.
Well, iNaturalist is a fantastic platform. It's a great place to help get identification for species that you have. And we actually use that sometimes when we get a photograph of an animal that our experts may be divided on what the species is. We'll post on iNaturalist and let the community weigh in. We're collecting data instead of them being individual observations. We're looking at it more cumulatively over the month, the presence and absence of species. And that's the reason why we do a checklist. We want to know just as much whether a species is not found in a month versus it is. And so iNaturalist is only positive observations. You see a bobcat, you take a photo, you submit the photograph with the date and time and location. So the data is similar. And we actually, for our conservation planning purposes, draw data that comes out of iNaturalist. So I would say it's a super great project. There's ways that we use those data and contribute to it, but it's better suited for individual observations that you may get from a different camera or on your phone, for example. And for the trail cam photos, we're using this checklist form instead.
Okay, and here's another question. Are you interested in seasonal data from a snowbird?
Yes. The only minimum requirement is doing it for a single month. So it would be interesting. Any month, full month that you were able to report data on is fantastic. Even if you have data for 2 weeks, you can put in the time frame that your camera was running. We like a whole month, but we'd rather have whatever partial checklist you can provide. So the answer is absolutely yes.
Great. Okay, there are a lot of people that are still hanging here with us. Any of you out there have a question? Here's one. For volunteers, where are you located? Are there opportunities to volunteer remotely?
Yeah, our office is in Tucson, Arizona, but we have our projects are happening throughout the region. So we have a variety of wildlife cameras that need to be serviced out in open space. We're always looking for volunteers to adopt our cameras and help do that hiking. We can pair people, like I mentioned, if you're interested in doing something very remotely, but would enjoy looking through the wildlife camera photos, we can send you FotoFauna cameras and you could submit the monthly checklists for them, for example. You're welcome to send me an email and we could figure out what might be a good fit. We've got also stewardship projects going on in the Catalinas and the Galleros Mountains. And then we invite people to do spring surveys when they're out hiking and they come across a water source. There's a really simple survey you can do on your phone. So there's lots of volunteer opportunities, and I'll put my email address in the chat in case you want to reach out directly.
Okay. Chat, and here we have Emily at Sky Island Alliance.org.
Yep, that's
Emily
it.
at skyislandalliance.org. And if you'd like, I can include that in the links that I send to people. Emily?
Sure. Yeah, you're welcome to send
We will do
my
that as
contact
well.
info.
All right. Anyone else before we sign off? Okay, so again, let me remind you, you'll be able to watch this on YouTube if you haven't been watching it right now. And if you'd like to record or show your reaction to us, just hit the reaction buttons. Mine's on the bottom right of the screen, and you can do a love it or thumbs up or however you feel. And thank you very much, Emily.
Yeah, you're very
I think
welcome.
we're ready to stop the live.